Hi guys, so I've seen a lot of videos on YouTube already, comparisons between A7IV full frame camera Sony and 6700. I wanted to make a video about my reasons why I've sold my A7IV for A6700. So I had them both for quite a while, 6700 since release last year in August time here in UK. It was hard, it was difficult, but I couldn't justify to keep both of them. So I decided I'm gonna split apart from A7IV and keep only A6700. So I do shoot videography, sports videography, and usually fast moving actions like motorsport, ice hockey, basketball, all kinds of sports where the action is really fast in no specific order. Tell you the things that I've realized are just working better for me. AI autofocus, which is basically from the new A7R5, it's definitely more advanced. Not to say that the focus on A7IV is not amazing, it's simply just unbelievable like every other Sony camera, especially new generations. But A6700 give you a bit more options and selecting different objects like cars, trains, planes, and in my case when I'm shooting motorbikes or cars, it just sticks better with the autofocus in that case, so it does work better. Another thing, A7IV shoots up to 60 frames per second or 50 frames per second, depends on where you shoot, PAL or NTSC. A6700 can shoot 100 frames or 120 frames, again depends on where you are located in the world. Also, the difference is 60 frames per second on A7IV is cropped, whilst you get no crop up to 60 frames per second on A6700. You do get extra crop of 158 when you switch to 120 frames per second. Then next difference would be, okay, let's go first with sides where A6700 is leading for me. So it's 120 frames per second. The crop sensor that works better for me because it gives me more range where I really need it, especially racetrack. No crop on the sensor at 60 frames per second, so it's still 6K area, whilst when you're shooting on A7IV, it does crop 1.5. So the difference between these two sensors, A7IV sensor is cropping from the 7K area to 4K, whilst A6700 oversampled from 6K to down to 4K. So definitely before crop, A7IV will gonna give you sharper look and slightly better image quality. But as long as you switch to 60 frames per second, it does crop 1.5, so it's basically oversampled 4.66K footage, whilst on A6700, 60 frames per second will still gonna give you that oversampled 6K footage. So there is a difference in quality. It's not huge, can't tell that really, but if you pixel peeping, you can still see the difference. Whilst with A6700, that happens when you switch to 120 frames, 1.58, which is down to 3.9K footage from 6K sensor, oversampled sensor. Another thing, I'm not really using it a lot, but it's still available with A6700. With that AI, autofocus is auto framing, which is basically zooming in and out. Not sure if you know that feature, but it basically does let you in the camera to zoom you in and out whilst focusing on the subject that you want to film. So it's almost like moving the camera, but the camera is in place. I didn't use that here, but I can maybe, just to show you how it works. I had to switch on auto framing, so you're gonna see what is basically happening. What I just said, it will gonna zoom in and out and very slowly. You got different sections, the different settings, large, medium or small, but it's gonna keep moving in and out pretty much. So you will see if shooting photos, A6700 can shoot 11 frames per second, whilst A7IV can shoot 10 frames per second. So these are the reasons why I kept A6700 and not A7IV. 120 frames per second, slow-mo, crop sensor that gives me more range, more superior focus, no crop, full-size sensor on 60 frames per second, subject and object tracking, autofocus, auto framing. And I can say also maybe even the size itself, that could be the reason maybe that you're gonna like it or hate it. But I do kind of like a small size of it. And even when I had both of them, I would usually always grab in hand a 6700 with some kind of small prime lens that is still very, very small, but also amazingly capable camera. One thing that made a difference in my case is the sensor readout in the video and both photos is slightly faster. They are not amazing either for fast moving objects, but definitely A6700 is faster readout sensor. It could be down to the size because it's 26 megapixels in comparison to A7IV, which is 33 megapixels. A6700 gives you 15.8 milliseconds up to 60 frames per second. A6700 gives you about 16 milliseconds up to 60 frames per second, so it doesn't change that number. Whilst on A7IV, up to 30 frames per second, you get around 27 milliseconds, which is a way higher. So the higher the number is, the more rolling shutter you're going to see, the more bending you're going to see as you move the camera to follow the subject or object or whatever. That does change when you crop, when you change to 60 frames per second on A7IV down to 12.8, so kind of 13 milliseconds, which is slightly better than in comparison to A6700 because it stayed pretty much the same. There is no extra crop, so the more you crop, the faster the readout of the sensor is, put it that way. 27 milliseconds and 30 frames per second. When you switch to 60 frames per second, it goes down to about 13 milliseconds. Whilst on A6700, we get about 16 milliseconds up to 60 frames per second. When we switch to 120 frames per second, it goes down to about 8 milliseconds, which is a very quick and fast readout. So if you do a lot of slow-mo in 120 frames per second, that's just unbelievably fast readout. So you're going to see almost, I don't know if you move like an extremely fast, but I didn't see any bending while shooting slow-mo on A6700. These are pretty much all the positive sides of keeping A6700 and not A7IV. Now, that doesn't mean that there are not things that I liked more on A7IV. And on A7IV, you get 2 memory card slots. On A6700, only 1. So that I never used 2 at the same time, but it might be beneficial for some people if one slot fails or if one card fails and you have another backup on the second slot. I never use it, so for me it's not a big loss. Second thing is viewfinder, and I think display as well. It's slightly more resolution. Definitely viewfinder is larger, much easier to take photos. If you use that camera for photos, definitely more superior. Full frame camera A7IV does have better low light performance like every other full frame sensor, which is just larger. That is definitely an advantage of having a full frame camera. It gives you more smooth and I would say creamy look on the photos, especially. You get like a more background separation and bokeh. So definitely I enjoyed more A7IV photos than on A6700, but it's not day and night difference. But if you pixel peep and if you compare them both, I just liked more photos coming from full frame camera. A7IV, you do have normal HDMI port, whilst on A6700 it's a micro HDMI, and I just hate it. If you use any external monitor, it's very fragile and you need to be very careful not to break it. Another thing where A7IV wins is downsampled 7K sensor in comparison to A6700, which is 6K sensor. Like I said, if you pixel peep, you can see the difference, but if you use pretty much both cameras next to each other, you can color grade the same way. You can shoot S-Log3 and use the same footage and combine them both, and it's going to be very difficult to say, oh, this is a different camera now. So like I said, slightly better quality, 7K sensor, a bit sharper. Definitely I liked more up to 30 frames per second the video coming out of A7IV if I wasn't moving too quick and there wasn't any banding. In-body stabilization, A7IV does have 5.5 stops, whilst A6700 gives you 5 stops. So 0.5 stops more. I didn't see any difference. I couldn't tell you that there was a difference. They're both quite well, but depends on what you're shooting. If you need crystal smooth footage, then you definitely need a gimbal for both of these because they won't going to do the job well. So A7IV will give you slightly better dynamic range for about 1 stop. That's what the internet says. Again, I didn't see much of a difference. I was using both cameras for the same shoot where I was combining videos from each and I couldn't tell in the final product which one was which. I do have a very specific needs for this camera. Some people maybe won't agree with me, but in my case, it's just 6700 worked better. And not to say even the price difference, almost £1,000, keeping A6700 was just a better decision for me. So in which cases maybe A7IV would be better option. If I don't need 120 FPS and I'm shooting some kind of commercials, maybe people, product, whatever else, I think A7IV would be more superior camera. As long as you're not cropping, as long as you're not going into slow-mo territory, it's producing definitely better photos and it's producing definitely better footage up to 30 frames per second. first video talking on a channel. So if you did like this, if it was in any way or shape helpful, please give me a thumbs up, and please comment below as well if you do have any questions and if I can help. I'm going to try and make more of these videos, talk about the gear that I use, maybe put some kind of POV shots and whatever I'm going to be doing this year. Take care. Bye.